There is a place on this planet so deep that if you dropped Mount Everest to its floor, the mountain's peak would still be swallowed by more than a mile of ocean above it. It's called the Challenger Deep, the lowest point of the Mariana Trench, and for a long time scientists believed nothing could live there, not because they hadn't looked, but because the physics simply didn't seem to allow it. That depth, the pressure reaches more than 1,000 times what we experience at the surface, the equivalent of about 100 full-grown elephants standing on every inch of your body. Steel bends, styrofoam cups sent down in research submersibles come back the size of a thumb. The zone is named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, because for a long time scientists assumed it was as lifeless as death itself. So when the first cameras finally made it down, everyone expected a dead, empty desert. Instead, they saw movement, ghostly shapes drifting through the darkness, creatures feeding, swimming, living in conditions that should have crushed them flat in an instant. Some looked soft and delicate, almost like they could melt away. Others resembled things you'd find in a shallow reef, somehow displaced into the most hostile environment on Earth. Despite the extreme pressure, absence of light, and near-freezing temperatures, the Mariana Trench hosts a variety of life forms, and the deeper researchers have gone, the more consistent that pattern becomes. Life isn't just present down there, it appears to be thriving. Today, we're going to take a slow, quiet journey to the very bottom of the world and meet the creatures that call it home. If you're new here and you love stories like this, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It genuinely helps more people find their way to videos like this one. And if you don't mind sharing, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from today, and what is the time over there? I love seeing how far these deep sea stories travel across the world, so settle in and let's descend into the deepest part of the ocean. The deeper the descent continues, the more the ocean reveals a quiet arithmetic of weight, each layer adding to a sum that never resets. 10 meters pass, then another 10, and with each interval, the water above grows heavier, pressing downward with increasing insistence. What begins as a gentle accumulation becomes something far more absolute, a force that builds without interruption or relief. There is no threshold where this weight suddenly becomes extreme. It gathers gradually, almost patiently, as if the ocean is unaware of its own magnitude. A slow descent carries this growing pressure along with it, transforming the surroundings in ways that are not immediately visible. Instruments record the change in steady increments, numbers rising in calm progression, marking a reality that deepens long before it is fully understood. Far below, where the seafloor sinks into its most remote depths, the accumulated weight reaches a point that reshapes the nature of existence. The water above forms an immense column, pressing from every direction at once. It does not strike or shift. It surrounds completely, touching all surfaces equally, filling every space with a uniform and unyielding force. At this level, pressure is no longer something applied. It becomes something that simply is. This force acts on all matter, quietly altering its behavior. Materials that appear solid and unchanging near the surface begin to respond differently. Metals can flex over time, their structure yielding under constant compression. Objects that contain even the smallest traces of air begin to contract, their internal spaces collapsing as the surrounding pressure forces them inward. A simple container, lowered into such depths, may return transformed, its shape reduced, its volume diminished. Air itself becomes unstable in this environment. Gas compresses rapidly under increasing pressure, shrinking into smaller volumes as the surrounding force intensifies. Spaces that once held shape and structure can no longer resist. This has profound implications for any form of life. Many organisms near the surface rely on gas-filled compartments, using them for buoyancy or internal balance. In the deep, those same structures become liabilities, unable to withstand the relentless compression. The influence of pressure extends beyond physical form into the chemistry that sustains life. Within every organism, countless molecular interactions depend on precise arrangements. Proteins must fold into exact shapes to function properly, their structure guiding essential biological processes. Under immense pressure, these shapes can shift subtly, altering how they behave. The bonds that hold them together respond to the surrounding force, favoring more compact configurations. Reactions that once occurred easily may slow or change, shaped by an environment that resists expansion at every scale. Even the movement of water itself reflects this transformation. As pressure increases, water becomes slightly denser, offering greater resistance to motion. Movement through this environment requires more effort, each action meeting a steady opposition. There is no turbulence, no sudden barrier, only a persistent resistance that defines how things move. Speed becomes less common, replaced by slower, more deliberate motion. What emerges is not simply a deeper version of the ocean above, but a fundamentally altered world. The rules that govern life near the surface no longer apply in the same way. Structures must endure constant compression. Systems can no longer depend on internal gas. Every process, from the folding of a molecule to the movement of a body, is shaped by a force that never weakens. And throughout it all, the pressure remains unchanged. It does not rise or fall with time. It does not fluctuate or pulse. It exists as a constant presence, silent and complete, defining a world where everything is held firmly in place by the immense and steady weight of the ocean above. The first images arrived not with clarity, but with hesitation. Signals traveled slowly upward from the deep, carrying fragments of light through miles of water, each frame assembling itself line by line. What appeared on the screens was faint at first, a shifting field of shadow and pale sediment, illuminated only by the narrow reach of artificial light. Those early missions had been prepared for absence. The descent had already suggested a world shaped by forces too extreme for living systems to endure, and so the expectation settled quietly into every observation. The cameras were lowered not to find life, but to confirm its absence, to witness a stillness that matched the weight above. For a time, that stillness seemed complete. Fine particles drifted across the view, moving slowly through the water like suspended dust. The seafloor stretched outward, soft and undisturbed, holding no immediate sign of motion. It appeared as a place where processes had slowed to near silence, where nothing stirred with intention. Then something shifted. At the edge of the frame, just beyond the brightest part of the light, a form moved. It did not rush or dart. It drifted with a quiet deliberation, its outline faint, almost transparent against the surrounding darkness. The motion was subtle enough to be mistaken for a trick of the current, yet it held a direction, a presence that resisted dismissal. As the cameras continued to observe, more shapes emerged. Some hovered just above the sediment, others glided slowly through the water, their bodies soft and undefined. They did not resemble the rigid forms often associated with survival in extreme conditions. Instead, they appeared delicate, almost fragile, as if they belonged to a gentler place. The light revealed them only in fragments, a curve of a body, a faint ripple along an edge, a suggestion of movement that slipped in and out of visibility. Beyond the reach of the illumination, the darkness remained complete, concealing whatever else might have been present. Yet even within that limited view, the conclusion became difficult to avoid. There was life here. The realization unfolded gradually, not as a sudden declaration, but as a quiet shift in understanding. Each new frame reinforced the same observation. Movement was not an anomaly, it was part of the environment. The seafloor, once assumed to be still, now held signs of activity, subtle but consistent. Within the scientific community, the response carried a similar quietness, though beneath it lay a profound change. Assumptions that had once seemed grounded in physical limits began to loosen. The idea that extreme pressure alone could prevent life no longer held its certainty. The evidence, though fragile in appearance, was persistent. Further missions returned with clearer images, more detailed observations. The shapes seen before were confirmed, joined by others that moved with different patterns, some settling into the sediment, others drifting just above it. The variety suggested not a rare exception, but a system that had found its own balance. This discovery did more than add new entries to a catalog of species. It reshaped the boundaries of where life could be expected. Conditions once considered prohibitive were revealed to be inhabited, not sparsely, but with a quiet consistency. The deep was no longer defined by absence, but by a form of presence that had remained hidden until the tools to observe it finally reached far enough. Even then, much remained unseen. The cameras captured only what their light could reveal, leaving vast areas beyond their reach untouched by observation. Yet the images that returned were enough to alter a long-held perspective. Life was not confined to the familiar conditions of the surface. It extended downward into places shaped by pressure and darkness, existing in forms that did not announce themselves, but endured all the same. And in those first uncertain frames, where movement appeared against a background of silence, the deep ocean began to speak in a language that had gone unnoticed for far too long. In the dim reach of artificial light, some forms appear so slight that they seem almost unfinished, as if they are only partially present in the water around them. Their outlines blur at the edges, their bodies carrying a softness that resists clear definition. They do not hold a firm shape in the way surface creatures often do. Instead, they waver gently, as though the boundary between organism and environment has been quietly loosened. These beings are often nearly transparent, their tissues allowing light to pass through with only the faintest distortion. Internal structures reveal themselves in soft gradients, subtle lines, and pale shadows drifting within a body that feels more like a suggestion than a solid form. There is no hard exterior, no visible armor, nothing that suggests resistance. At a glance, they seem too delicate to endure any kind of force, let alone the immense conditions surrounding them. Their movement reflects this same softness. Rather than pushing against the water with strength, they yield to it, folding and unfolding in slow, fluid motions. Some drift with a quiet rhythm, their bodies pulsing just enough to guide their path. Others remain suspended, barely moving at all, carried by subtle currents that pass unnoticed through the depths. Every motion appears gentle, almost hesitant, as if any sudden effort might cause them to dissolve. Yet this apparent fragility holds a deeper logic. In a place defined by constant pressure, rigidity becomes a point of tension. Hard structures resist the force around them, creating stress within their own form. Over time, that resistance can lead to failure, small weaknesses widening until the structure can no longer hold. Softness, by contrast, offers no such opposition. A body that yields can distribute pressure evenly, allowing the surrounding force to pass through without creating strain. These organisms are composed largely of water, their tissues closely matching the density of the environment around them. There are no large internal cavities, no spaces that might collapse under compression. Instead, their bodies exist in quiet balance with the water itself, neither pushing outward nor resisting inward. This harmony allows them to remain stable, even where more rigid forms would falter. Their simplicity also plays a role. Without heavy skeletal frameworks or complex support systems, there is little within them that can be distorted beyond function. Their structures are minimal yet sufficient, carrying only what is necessary to maintain life. In such an environment, excess becomes a liability, and reduction becomes a form of resilience. The contrast between their appearance and their endurance creates a quiet dissonance. They resemble forms that might belong to shallow waters, where light filters through and conditions are gentle. Their translucence and softness evoke a sense of vulnerability, as if they could be altered by the slightest disturbance. Yet here, in a place shaped by immense and unchanging force, they persist without visible strain. This persistence is not marked by strength in the usual sense. It is not built on resistance or defense, but on acceptance of the surrounding conditions. Their bodies do not fight the pressure. They exist within it, shaped by it, allowing it to define their form without breaking it. What appears fragile is, in this context, precisely suited to endure. As they drift through the darkness, their forms shifting with quiet fluidity, they carry a reminder that survival does not always align with expectation. The qualities that seem weakest can become the most stable when the environment changes. In the deep, where force is constant and absolute, softness becomes not a limitation but a quiet advantage held within bodies that seem almost too delicate to remain, yet continue without interruption. At a depth where even the faintest outlines fade into a uniform dimness, a small figure moves with a quiet steadiness, neither drifting aimlessly nor struggling against its surroundings. Its presence feels improbable, not because it is hidden, but because it exists at all. A fish inhabiting a layer of the ocean, once thought beyond the reach of vertebrate life. This is the trench-dwelling snailfish, recorded at depths that extend far below the limits previously imagined for its kind. Its discovery did not arrive with spectacle, but with careful observation. A form appearing within the narrow field of view, moving with calm intention across a landscape shaped by immense pressure. It did not resemble the armored or heavily built creatures one might expect in such a place. Instead, it carried a softness that echoed the quiet logic of the deep. Its body lacks the firm musculature and rigid structure often associated with fish closer to the surface. The skeleton is reduced, with bones that are thinner and less calcified, offering support without resistance. Its flesh is gelatinous, composed in a way that allows it to remain stable under conditions that would compress more rigid forms. The result is a shape that appears delicate, almost weightless, yet it holds together with a quiet resilience. The absence of certain features is just as important as what remains. Swim bladders, common in many fish, are not present here. In shallower waters, these gas-filled organs allow for buoyancy control, adjusting position with subtle changes in volume. At extreme depths, such structures would collapse under pressure, becoming a point of failure rather than support. The snailfish moves without this mechanism, relying instead on the natural balance of its body within the surrounding water. Its tissues are carefully tuned to its environment. Within its cells, compounds known as osmolytes, including trimethylamine N oxide, accumulate in higher concentrations. These molecules help stabilize proteins, allowing them to maintain their function under immense pressure. Without this chemical support, the delicate processes that sustain life would begin to falter. Here, at the level of molecules, the fish carries an internal adjustment that mirrors the conditions around it. Movement is unhurried, each motion measured and efficient. The fins extend softly, guiding rather than forcing its path. There is no sudden burst of speed, no sharp turn that disrupts the stillness. It navigates its environment with minimal effort, conserving energy in a place where resources are not abundant and every action carries a cost. Despite its ability to exist at such depths, this fish is bound closely to its environment. The same adaptations that allow it to endure the pressure also limit where it can survive. If brought upward, even gradually, the balance within its body begins to shift. The stabilizing molecules, so effective under compression, become disruptive at lower pressures. Proteins that were once held in place may unfold, losing their function. Tissues, adapted to constant force, no longer maintain their structure in the same way. The transition is not one the fish can withstand. Outside its narrow range of depth, the conditions that define its existence no longer align with its biology. It is not simply a matter of preference, but of compatibility. Its form, its chemistry, and its movement are all shaped by the environment it inhabits. And without that environment, those same traits become fragile. In its quiet passage through the deep, the snailfish embodies a precise balance between organism and world. It does not overcome the conditions around it. It exists because it is entirely shaped by them, a life form that fits so closely within its environment that it cannot be separated from it without losing what allows it to remain. There is a depth beyond which light no longer arrives, not even as a faint trace. It does not fade gradually here, nor soften into twilight. It simply ends, leaving the water in a steady, unbroken darkness that has remained unchanged for ages beyond measure. In this place, the idea of day and night loses meaning, replaced by a constant absence that never shifts. Without sunlight, the familiar foundation of life disappears. Photosynthesis, the quiet process that fuels most ecosystems near the surface, cannot occur in these depths. There are no plants stretching toward light, no drifting algae converting energy into growth. The usual beginning of the food chain is absent, leaving behind a system that must find its energy elsewhere. What emerges instead is a different kind of network, one that does not depend on light, but on what descends from above or forms through unseen chemical pathways. Tiny particles drift downward over long periods, fragments of organic material that originate far beyond this darkness. They settle slowly, accumulating on the seafloor or lingering in the water, forming a continuous but sparse supply of energy. These particles, often called marine snow, carry remnants of distant activity, pieces of life that have completed their time in brighter waters. Though each fragment is small, their steady arrival creates a quiet link between the surface and the deep. Organisms here have adapted to rely on this slow delivery, feeding on what falls rather than what grows around them. Occasionally, larger forms descend as well. The remains of a creature from above may sink intact, arriving as a sudden concentration of energy in an otherwise sparse environment. These moments are rare, yet they introduce a temporary abundance, drawing organisms from the surrounding darkness. Life gathers briefly, then disperses again once the resource has been fully consumed. Alongside this downward flow, there are also processes that begin within the deep itself. In certain areas, chemical reactions provide another source of energy, independent of sunlight. Minerals interacting with seawater release compounds that can be used by specialized microorganisms. Through chemosynthesis, these organisms convert chemical energy into forms that can support life, forming the base of localized ecosystems. From these foundations, a web of interactions develops. Small organisms consume the particles that settle or the products of chemical processes. Larger creatures feed on them in turn, creating layers of connection that extend through the darkness. The structure is quieter than surface ecosystems, less abundant, yet it remains stable over long periods. The absence of light shapes more than just energy flow. It influences behavior, form, and the pace at which life unfolds. Growth tends to be slower, reproduction more measured, each process aligned with the limited and unpredictable supply of resources. There is no reliance on daily cycles, no synchronization with rising or setting light. Instead, life follows a steady rhythm defined by availability and endurance. This system challenges assumptions formed in brighter environments. The idea that life depends on sunlight as its primary source of energy does not hold here. Instead, life demonstrates a broader flexibility, finding ways to persist even when the most familiar conditions are absent. The deep ocean reveals that the foundations of ecosystems can shift, reorganizing around entirely different sources. Within this darkness, life does not announce itself with color or brightness. It exists quietly, sustained by processes that unfold slowly and often invisibly. Each organism is part of a network that does not begin with light, but with the subtle movement of matter and the quiet transformation of energy. And in this unlit world, where no leaf turns toward the sun and no shadow is cast, life continues to arrange itself into patterns that endure, shaped not by illumination, but by the steady presence of what arrives, settles, and becomes something more. From far above, beyond the reach of darkness, a slow descent is always underway. It does not arrive in a single motion or invisible streams, but in a continuous, almost imperceptible fall. Tiny fragments begin their journey in distant waters, separating from larger forms, drifting downward through layers that gradually grow heavier and still. By the time these particles reach the deep, they have become something quiet and scattered, a fine suspension moving through the water with no clear origin in sight. This gentle rain is known as marine snow, though it bears little resemblance to anything cold or crystalline. It is composed of organic remnants, microscopic life, and the smallest traces of once living structures, all settling with a patience that stretches across vast distances. Each particle moves slowly, guided by gravity and subtle currents, taking days or even weeks to arrive. Along the way, it may be consumed, altered, or broken apart further, becoming part of an ongoing exchange between different depths. What finally reaches the ocean floor is only a portion of what began its descent, yet even this reduced form carries energy that can be used. For the organisms that inhabit these depths, this steady fall becomes a primary source of sustenance. It is not abundant in any immediate sense, but it is consistent. Creatures position themselves within this downward flow, collecting what drifts past, feeding on what settles, or absorbing nutrients released into the surrounding water. Survival here is shaped by attentiveness to these small arrivals, by an ability to make use of what might seem insignificant elsewhere. The scarcity of each individual particle gives it a certain importance. Nothing is wasted. Fragments are consumed fully, broken down into smaller components, passed through different layers of the ecosystem. What one organism cannot use becomes available to another, forming a chain of utilization that extends until little remains unclaimed. At times, the descent takes on a different form. Larger bodies, no longer sustained in the upper ocean, begin a much slower and more deliberate fall. These are not particles, but entire organisms, drifting downward in silence. As they sink, they pass through layers of life that gradually feed upon them, reducing their mass as they continue toward the seafloor. On rare occasions, something larger still reaches the depths intact. The remains of a massive creature, such as a whale, may descend over great distances, arriving as a sudden concentration of organic material. When it settles, it transforms the immediate area. Organisms gather, drawn by the presence of such an abundant resource, forming a temporary community around it. This event unfolds over time. First come those that consume the soft tissues, breaking them down into smaller fragments. Then others arrive, feeding on what remains, including the bones, which hold nutrients that can be accessed slowly. The site becomes a focal point in an otherwise sparse environment, sustaining life for extended periods before gradually fading back into the surrounding quiet. Between these rare events, the slow fall continues. Marine snow resumes its steady descent, re-establishing the subtle rhythm that defines daily existence in the deep. Each particle contributes to a system that depends on accumulation rather than abundance, on persistence rather than immediacy. In this world, scale shifts in meaning. What appears small becomes significant, and what is rare becomes transformative. The flow of food is neither constant nor predictable in the way it is near the surface, yet it remains sufficient when approached with patience and efficiency. As these fragments continue their quiet journey downward, they connect distant layers of the ocean, linking life across depths that never meet directly. In their slow descent, they carry the remnants of one world into another, sustaining a system that relies on every piece that arrives, no matter how small. Time moves differently here, not because it changes in any measurable way, but because so little interrupts its passage. There are stretches when nothing arrives, when the quiet remains undisturbed, and the surrounding space offers no immediate sign of nourishment. In these intervals, life does not search in urgency. It settles into a rhythm that accepts absence as part of existence. Organisms in this environment often experience long periods without food. Days extend into weeks, and weeks into longer spans, with no guarantee of when the next opportunity will appear. Unlike in more active regions of the ocean, there is no regular cycle of feeding. Availability is irregular, shaped by distant events and slow movements that cannot be predicted from within the depths. To endure this uncertainty, these creatures operate at a pace that reflects their surroundings. Their metabolism, the sum of processes that sustain life, runs at a markedly reduced rate. Energy is used sparingly, allocated only where it is essential. Internal reactions proceed more slowly, conserving resources rather than expending them in rapid activity. This slowing extends to movement as well. Actions are measured and deliberate, each motion considered against the cost it requires. There is little excess, no unnecessary exertion. Even the simplest adjustment carries weight in an environment where energy cannot be easily replaced. The body becomes a system of careful decisions, each one aligned with the need to preserve what is already held. Growth follows a similar pattern. Development unfolds gradually, often over extended periods, as the organism builds itself from limited input. There is no rush toward maturity, no rapid expansion driven by abundance. Instead, growth reflects a steady accumulation, shaped by the occasional arrival of nutrients and the long intervals between them. Reproduction, too, adapts to this pace. Opportunities are rare, and the energy required to produce offspring must be balanced against the need for survival. Some organisms delay reproduction until conditions allow it, while others release fewer offspring, each one representing a significant investment. The process becomes less about frequency and more about timing and efficiency. Within this framework, patience is not a choice but a necessity. Survival depends on the ability to endure extended periods of scarcity without disruption. The body becomes a reservoir, storing energy when it is available and drawing upon it slowly over time. Chemical processes adjust to maintain stability, ensuring that essential functions continue even in the absence of new input. There is also a form of stillness that accompanies this way of living. Many organisms remain in place for long durations, minimizing movement to reduce energy use. Others drift slowly, allowing subtle currents to carry them rather than expending effort to move independently. Activity is reserved for moments when it is most likely to yield a return. This approach reshapes the meaning of success. It is not defined by speed or dominance, but by endurance. The ability to persist through long intervals without change becomes the measure of adaptation. Life here does not seek constant engagement with its environment. It waits, maintaining itself quietly until conditions shift. In this waiting, there is a continuity that extends beyond immediate events. Each organism exists within a timeline that is stretched, where moments of activity are separated by long periods of quiet maintenance. The passage of time becomes less about movement and more about persistence, a steady continuation that does not rely on constant input. As these intervals unfold, the deep remains calm, holding its inhabitants in a state of quiet balance. When food does arrive, it is met with readiness, but without haste. The system adjusts, absorbs, and then returns to its slower rhythm, carrying forward once more into the long stretches where survival is measured not in action, but in the ability to wait without end. Nothing in this depth appears reinforced in the way one might expect. There are no thick shells layered for protection, no rigid frames braced against the surrounding force. Instead, bodies exist with a quiet openness, as if they have chosen not to resist what presses around them. At first glance, this absence of structure seems like a vulnerability, yet it reveals a different kind of stability. Pressure here does not act as a sudden impact. It is constant, equal from every direction, leaving no single point to bear the load. Because of this, there is no crushing force in the way it might be imagined. Collapse occurs only when there is imbalance, when something within an organism holds a different pressure than the water outside. Without that difference, there is nothing to compress. Many deep-sea organisms maintain this balance by allowing their internal environment to match the pressure of the surrounding water. Fluids within their bodies are nearly incompressible, meaning they do not change volume significantly, even under immense force. When the inside and outside remain aligned in this way, the pressure passes through without distortion. There is no tension created, no structural failure waiting to occur. This equilibrium removes the need for reinforcement. A body that does not resist does not need to be strengthened against resistance. Instead of building rigid support, these organisms rely on a form that remains flexible, able to shift slightly without breaking. Their tissues are soft, often gelatinous, composed in a way that distributes force evenly across their entire structure. The absence of air spaces plays a central role in this design. Gas compresses under pressure, shrinking rapidly and creating instability. Any cavity filled with air would collapse, distorting the surrounding tissue and disrupting essential functions. By eliminating such spaces entirely, these organisms avoid the risk altogether. Their bodies contain no voids that can be reduced, no pockets that can be forced inward. Instead, they are filled almost entirely with fluid, a continuous medium that behaves similarly to the water outside. This similarity creates a seamless interaction between organism and environment. Pressure does not encounter a boundary where it must change or concentrate. It moves through without interruption, leaving the overall form unchanged. Structural simplicity further supports this balance. Without complex frameworks or dense materials, there are fewer points where stress can accumulate. The body becomes a unified whole rather than a collection of rigid parts. This reduces the likelihood of localized failure, allowing the organism to maintain its integrity even under constant force. This simplicity also allows for subtle adjustments. Flexible tissues can shift slightly in response to movement or changes in position, redistributing pressure as needed. There is no brittleness, no fixed shape that must be preserved at all costs. Instead, there is a quiet adaptability, a capacity to absorb and accommodate the surrounding conditions. In this way, the expectation of collapse gives way to a different understanding. It is not strength in the conventional sense that allows these organisms to endure, but alignment. Their bodies are not built to withstand pressure as an external force. They are built to exist within it, to share in it, to remove the distinction between inside and outside as much as possible. As they move or remain still within this environment, their forms hold without strain, carried by a balance that does not require reinforcement. What seems fragile at first reveals itself as carefully attuned, shaped by the same conditions that might otherwise appear overwhelming. And within this quiet design, there is no moment of resistance, no visible struggle. The pressure remains constant, yet the body does not collapse, because there is nothing within it that stands apart from the weight that surrounds it. Beneath the stillness of form and movement, a quieter process unfolds, one that cannot be seen even in the closest observation. Within each cell, within each folded strand of living matter, there is a delicate arrangement that must hold its shape against conditions that press constantly from all sides. Life here depends not only on structure, but on the ability of its smallest components to remain intact. Proteins, the working molecules of life, are shaped into precise forms that allow them to function. Their surfaces curve and fold in exact ways, creating sites where reactions can occur, where energy can be transferred, where the processes of living are carried forward. These shapes are not fixed by rigid supports. They are held together by subtle forces, sensitive to their environment. Under immense pressure, these shapes face a quiet instability. The surrounding force encourages molecules to occupy less space, favoring compactness over openness. Without protection, proteins can begin to shift, their folds tightening or collapsing in ways that alter their function. A slight change in form can be enough to interrupt the processes they support, slowing or stopping reactions that are essential for survival. To maintain stability, deep-sea organisms rely on specialized molecules that exist within their cells. Among these are compounds such as trimethylamine and oxide, which accumulate in higher concentrations than in organisms living closer to the surface. These molecules do not replace proteins or alter their purpose. Instead, they surround them, influencing the environment in which they exist. Their presence helps counteract the effects of pressure by stabilizing the folded shapes of proteins. They interact with the surrounding water and the protein surfaces in a way that preserves the delicate balance required for function. Rather than allowing compression to distort these structures, they create a condition in which the original form can be maintained, even under constant force. This adjustment occurs at a scale far below what can be observed directly, yet its impact extends through the entire organism. Every process that depends on protein function, from metabolism to movement, relies on this stability. Without it, the coordinated activity within cells would begin to break down, leaving the organism unable to sustain itself. Membranes, which define the boundaries of cells, also adapt to these conditions. Composed of layers of lipids, they must remain flexible enough to allow the passage of molecules while maintaining their integrity. Under pressure, these membranes can become too rigid, losing the fluidity required for proper function. To prevent this, deep-sea organisms incorporate specific types of fats that remain stable and flexible even when compressed. These lipids contain unsaturated bonds that introduce slight bends into their structure, preventing the membrane from packing too tightly. This maintains a level of fluidity that allows proteins embedded within the membrane to operate effectively. The result is a surface that continues to function as a dynamic boundary rather than becoming a rigid barrier. Within this microscopic landscape, the balance is precise. Each molecule contributes to a system that must remain stable despite the surrounding conditions. There is little margin for error. The environment does not fluctuate, but it also does not ease. Every component must be aligned with the pressure that defines it. This reveals a form of adaptation that is not immediately visible. The shapes seen in larger structures are supported by an intricate arrangement at a much smaller scale. Survival is not only a matter of form or behavior, but of chemistry, of interactions that occur continuously within each cell. As these processes continue, quietly and without interruption, they sustain the life that exists in the deep. The external stillness reflects an internal stability, one maintained not by resistance, but by a careful alignment of molecules that allows life to persist, even where the conditions seem least forgiving. At the smallest scale of life, where boundaries are measured in nanometers, each cell carries a thin envelope that defines its existence. This membrane is not rigid or fixed. It is a living surface, shifting constantly, allowing substances to pass, signals to travel, and internal balance to be maintained. In the deep, this boundary must remain intact under conditions that would otherwise force it into stillness. The membrane is composed of lipids arranged in a bilayer, their structures forming a flexible barrier that separates the interior of the cell from the surrounding environment. Near the surface, this arrangement remains fluid, with molecules moving freely, creating a surface that can adapt and respond. Under intense pressure, however, these lipids are pushed closer together, reducing the space between them. Without adjustment, the membrane could become too tightly packed, losing the fluidity required for its functions. To prevent this, deep-sea organisms incorporate specific types of fats into their membranes. These lipids contain unsaturated bonds, small variations in their chemical structure that introduce bends along their length. These bends prevent the molecules from aligning too closely, preserving the spacing needed for movement within the membrane. Even as pressure increases, this structure resists becoming overly compact, maintaining a degree of flexibility. This flexibility is essential for the processes that occur at the membrane. Proteins embedded within this surface rely on a certain level of movement to function. They act as channels and transporters, allowing nutrients to enter and waste to leave. If the membrane becomes too rigid, these proteins cannot operate effectively. By maintaining fluidity, the cell ensures that these pathways remain open and active. The membrane also supports communication between the cell and its surroundings. Signals are received and transmitted through interactions at this boundary, guiding responses to changes in the environment. In the deep, where conditions remain constant but resources are limited, this communication allows the cell to adjust its internal processes with precision. The membrane must therefore remain dynamic, capable of supporting these interactions without disruption. Within the cell, additional adjustments reinforce this stability. The internal environment is carefully regulated, with concentrations of molecules balanced to match the conditions outside. This reduces stress on the membrane, allowing it to function without strain. The cell becomes a system in equilibrium, where internal and external pressures align closely enough to prevent distortion. Enzymes within the cell, many of which are proteins themselves, depend on this stability to carry out their roles. They facilitate reactions that convert nutrients into usable energy, supporting every aspect of the organism's existence. If the membrane fails, these processes cannot be sustained. By preserving the integrity of this boundary, the cell protects the conditions required for these reactions to continue. This resilience is not visible in the way larger structures are. It does not appear as strength or resistance, but as a quiet persistence at the level of molecules. Each component contributes to a system that must remain stable without becoming rigid, flexible without losing form. The balance is precise, maintained continuously as the cell interacts with its surroundings. Through this arrangement, cells in the deep do not break under pressure. They remain functional, their membranes adapting to conditions that would otherwise compromise their structure. The surface that defines them continues to shift and respond, carrying out its roles without interruption. And within this microscopic steadiness, life maintains its continuity, sustained by boundaries that hold not through resistance, but through a careful and constant flexibility that allows them to endure. Motion here is never taken for granted. Even the smallest shift carries a quiet resistance, as if the surrounding water acknowledges every movement and responds in kind. Nothing moves freely in the sense familiar to shallower places. Each action unfolds within a medium that presses gently yet persistently against it, shaping the way bodies travel through space. Creatures in this depth do not rely on bursts of speed. Their movements are measured, deliberate, often unfolding over longer intervals than expected. A fin extends slowly, a body adjusts its orientation with care, and forward motion follows in a steady, unhurried line. There is no urgency in these actions, only a precise alignment between effort and necessity. This pace reflects an economy of energy. Every movement requires expenditure, and in an environment where resources are limited, that cost must be carefully managed. Rapid motion, with its sudden demands, would draw heavily from reserves that cannot be easily replenished. Instead, movement becomes efficient, reduced to what is essential for survival. Swimming, when it occurs, is often subtle. Rather than pushing forcefully against the water, many organisms use gentle undulations or small, repeated motions that maintain a slow forward drift. The body moves as a continuous surface, minimizing disruption and reducing resistance. This approach allows progress without excess effort, conserving energy over time. Some species rely less on active movement and more on the surrounding currents. They position themselves within the water in ways that allow them to be carried gradually, adjusting only when necessary. By aligning with these flows, they reduce the need for constant propulsion. Movement becomes a collaboration between organism and environment, rather than a forceful act against it. Others remain nearly still, conserving energy by limiting motion to brief, purposeful actions. They wait within their surroundings, responding only when an opportunity arises. This stillness is not inactivity, but a strategy that balances presence with conservation. The body remains ready, yet avoids unnecessary expenditure. For those that hunt, the approach reflects this same principle. Rather than pursuing prey over long distances, they rely on proximity and timing. A slow approach or a brief, controlled movement can be enough to capture what is needed. The emphasis is not on speed, but on precision, on reducing effort while maintaining effectiveness. The structure of their bodies supports this style of movement. Flexible tissues allow for smooth adjustments, while the absence of heavy or rigid components reduces the energy required to change direction. Each part of the organism contributes to a system designed for efficiency, where motion flows rather than interrupts. Water itself, under these conditions, offers a steady resistance that shapes every action. It does not halt movement, but it discourages excess. The effort required to move quickly increases sharply, making rapid acceleration impractical. Over time, this influence has guided the development of behaviors and forms that favor slower, more sustainable motion. Speed, in this context, becomes unnecessary. The environment does not reward it, and the cost outweighs any potential benefit. Instead, survival depends on endurance, on the ability to move when needed, and remain still when possible. The balance between action and rest becomes finely tuned, reflecting the conditions that define this world. As these movements unfold, they create a pattern that is both quiet and continuous. There are no sudden shifts, no abrupt changes in direction. Everything proceeds with a measured rhythm, shaped by the gentle but constant presence of resistance. Within this steady flow, life continues to move, not in haste, but in harmony with the medium that surrounds it, each motion carefully aligned with the limits and possibilities of a world that quietly pushes back. In a place where no external light arrives, some organisms carry their own illumination, small and contained, appearing without warning against the surrounding dark. These glows are not constant or overwhelming. They emerge in brief pulses or steady, faint emissions, revealing just enough to mark a presence before fading back into obscurity. This light is produced through bioluminescence, a process in which chemical reactions generate visible glow. Within specialized cells or structures, molecules such as luciferin interact with enzymes like luciferase, releasing energy in the form of light rather than heat. The result is a cold illumination, efficient and controlled, shaped by the needs of the organism that produces it. The colors vary, though they often remain within a narrow range. Soft blues and greens dominate, wavelengths that travel most effectively through water at these depths. The light does not spread far, instead forming small halos or narrow beams that dissolve quickly into the surrounding darkness. Each glow is localized, confined to the body that creates it. For some organisms, this light serves as a means of finding food. A faint glow may attract smaller creatures, drawing them closer without revealing the full outline of the source. The movement of light becomes a subtle signal, suggesting the presence of something else, something to investigate. As the distance closes, the advantage shifts quietly to the one producing the glow. Others use light as a form of communication. In an environment where vision is limited, brief flashes or patterns of illumination can signal presence, identity, or readiness to interact. These signals are often simple, repeated in consistent rhythms, allowing recognition without the need for sustained brightness. The exchange remains minimal, conserving energy while still conveying information. There are also instances where light becomes a form of concealment. Some organisms produce illumination along their undersides, matching the faint residual glow from above, though distant and barely perceptible. This reduces the contrast between their bodies and the space beyond, making them less visible to anything observing from below. In this way, light is used not to reveal, but to blend. The structures that produce this glow are integrated into the body in different ways. Some organisms house luminous bacteria within specialized tissues, maintaining a symbiotic relationship where both benefit from the arrangement. Others generate light entirely through their own biochemical processes, controlling the intensity and duration with precision. The mechanisms vary, yet the outcome remains the same: a localized source of illumination within a world otherwise defined by its absence. Energy use is carefully managed. Producing light requires resources, and in an environment where energy is limited, this process must remain efficient. Many organisms emit light only when necessary, conserving their reserves for moments when it provides a clear advantage. The glow is brief, purposeful, and rarely wasted. Movement and light often combine. A drifting organism may pulse with faint illumination as it moves, its path marked by intermittent flashes that appear and vanish in sequence. Others remain still, their light steady but dim, forming a quiet point within the surrounding dark. Each pattern reflects a different approach, shaped by the role light plays in that organism's survival. Within this environment, illumination is no longer a constant background, but a tool used with intention. It does not define the space, but punctuates it, creating moments of visibility that are brief and controlled. Each instance of light carries meaning, whether it draws, signals, or conceals. And in this way, the darkness is not empty, but occasionally interrupted by these small, deliberate glows, each one a reminder that even in the absence of sunlight, life finds ways to create its own light and use it with quiet precision. In the absence of light, perception turns inward, reshaping itself around signals that do not rely on vision. Eyes, when present, often hold little detail, their role reduced or altered in a place where illumination never reaches. Some remain as faint structures, capable of detecting only the slightest difference in brightness, while others diminish further, becoming nearly vestigial, no longer central to how the organism understands its surroundings. Instead, awareness emerges through other pathways, subtle and continuous. The water itself becomes a medium of information, carrying vibrations that spread outward from every movement. A shift in position, the motion of a body, even the quiet settling of particles, can create disturbances that travel through the surrounding space. These signals move slowly, but they persist, forming patterns that can be detected and interpreted. Many organisms possess specialized structures that respond to these vibrations. Fine sensory cells line their bodies or extend outward, tuned to changes in pressure and movement. These receptors do not capture images. They register motion, direction, and proximity, translating the surrounding activity into a form of perception that does not depend on sight. Through this sensitivity, an organism can detect the approach of another, the passing of something nearby, or the subtle displacement caused by movement in the distance. Chemical sensing plays an equally important role. Molecules released into the water drift outward, spreading gradually as they mix with the surrounding fluid. These chemical traces carry information about the presence of food, the proximity of other organisms, or the conditions of the environment itself. Specialized receptors allow organisms to detect these molecules at very low concentrations, identifying their source and following their gradient through the water. This process unfolds slowly, guided by differences that are often minute. A slightly higher concentration in one direction suggests a path to follow, while a diminishing trace signals distance from the source. Movement in response to these signals is careful and deliberate, aligning with the broader pattern of conservation that defines life in this environment. Each adjustment is measured, shaped by the information carried within the water. Touch, in a broader sense, extends beyond direct contact. The entire body can function as a receptive surface, sensitive to shifts in the surrounding medium. Changes in current, variations in pressure, and the presence of nearby objects all contribute to a continuous stream of input. This form of sensing does not isolate individual points of contact. It integrates information across the body, creating an awareness that is distributed rather than focused. Some organisms enhance this sensitivity through elongated appendages or fine filaments that extend into the water. These structures increase the area over which signals can be detected, allowing the organism to perceive changes at a greater distance. They move gently with the surrounding flow, registering variations that might otherwise go unnoticed. In this way, the environment is not empty or silent, but filled with subtle cues that replace the role of light. Movement leaves traces, presence creates patterns, and chemistry forms gradients that can be followed. Perception becomes an interpretation of these signals, a way of understanding space and activity without the need for visual detail. The absence of sight does not result in a lack of awareness. Instead, it leads to a different form of perception, one that is continuous and diffuse. Information is gathered not through images, but through the steady flow of signals carried by the water itself. As organisms move or remain still within this system, they navigate through a landscape defined by sensation rather than vision. Their understanding of the world forms through these quiet interactions, shaped by vibrations, chemicals, and the gentle shifts that pass through the deep, allowing them to sense their surroundings without ever needing to see them. Stillness becomes a form of concealment here, not as an absence of activity, but as a deliberate condition maintained with precision. In a place where movement travels outward as a detectable signal, remaining motionless can carry its own advantage. Predators in this environment often begin not with pursuit, but with patience, allowing the surrounding quiet to settle around them until their presence blends into it. Without reliance on vision, hunting shifts toward other forms of awareness. The slightest disturbance in the water can reveal the approach of another organism. A faint displacement, a subtle change in pressure, or a delicate ripple passing through the surrounding medium can carry information about direction and distance. These signals move slowly, but they persist, allowing the predator to register their presence well before contact. Positioning becomes essential. Rather than moving through the environment in search of prey, many predators establish themselves within it, selecting a location where passing organisms are more likely to appear. They remain there with minimal motion, their bodies aligned with the surrounding water, reducing any disturbance that might reveal them prematurely. When a signal arrives, the response is measured. The predator does not react immediately with force. It waits, allowing the movement to resolve into a clearer pattern, determining the path and speed of the approaching organism. This delay is not hesitation, but refinement, ensuring that the eventual action is directed with precision. Ambush emerges as the dominant strategy. At the moment when proximity is sufficient, movement occurs in a brief, controlled burst. The motion is direct, limited to what is necessary to secure contact. There is no extended chase, no prolonged exertion. The action concludes quickly, returning the environment to stillness almost as soon as it was disturbed. This approach minimizes energy use while maximizing effectiveness. In a place where resources are scarce, the cost of failure must remain low. A missed attempt does not lead to immediate pursuit, but to a return to waiting. The predator resumes its position, allowing the surrounding quiet to reestablish itself before the next opportunity arises. The absence of sound, in the sense familiar near the surface, adds another layer to this interaction. Water carries vibrations efficiently, but unnecessary movement can create signals that travel outward, alerting potential prey. Predators therefore maintain a form of silence, not through the absence of all motion, but through the careful control of it. Each action is measured to avoid producing detectable disturbances until the final moment. Body structure supports this strategy. Flexible tissues allow for sudden yet contained movement, while streamlined forms reduce resistance during the brief burst of action. Sensory structures remain active throughout, continuously monitoring the environment for changes. The entire organism becomes attuned to the balance between stillness and motion, shifting between them with precision. Prey, in turn, rely on similar forms of detection, creating an interaction shaped by subtle signals rather than visible cues. The encounter unfolds through a quiet exchange of information, each organism interpreting the movements of the other through the medium they share. Success depends on the ability to remain undetected for as long as possible, then act at the exact moment when detection can no longer be avoided. In this environment, hunting does not rely on speed or strength alone. It depends on timing, on the ability to interpret faint signals, and on the discipline to remain still until the conditions align. The surrounding water becomes both a pathway and a barrier, carrying information while also limiting movement. As these interactions continue, they leave little trace. The disturbance fades quickly, and the environment returns to its steady quiet. Predators resume their positions, blending once more into the stillness, where the next movement, however slight, may signal another opportunity. What remains after motion fades does not disappear. It settles, drifts, or lingers, becoming part of a slower cycle that continues long after the original form has ceased to move. In these depths, nothing is left unused for long. The quiet persistence of life ensures that every fragment, no matter how small, is drawn back into the system. Among the most constant participants in this process are the scavengers, organisms that do not hunt living prey, but instead rely on what has already ended. Amphipods, small crustaceans with curved bodies and delicate limbs, are among the most numerous of these. They move across the seafloor or through the water just above it, their presence often unnoticed until they gather in large numbers around a source of organic material. Their bodies are adapted for this role. Flexible exoskeletons allow them to navigate uneven surfaces, while specialized appendages enable them to grasp and break apart soft tissues. They do not consume in haste, but with steady efficiency, working collectively to reduce larger forms into smaller pieces that can be further processed by others. When a significant source of material arrives, such as the remains of a larger organism, these scavengers often appear quickly, drawn by chemical signals that spread through the water. The gathering is gradual at first, then more concentrated, as individuals converge from the surrounding area. They cover the surface of the material, their movements subtle but continuous, gradually transforming what was once a single form into dispersed fragments. This process extends beyond amphipods alone. Other scavengers contribute in different ways, each suited to a particular stage of breakdown. Some feed on softer tissues, while others focus on more resistant structures, including bones or chitin. Bacteria and microorganisms also play a role, decomposing material at a microscopic level, releasing nutrients back into the surrounding environment. Together, these organisms form a network of recycling that operates without interruption. There is no accumulation of unused matter, no lingering remains that persist unchanged. Each fragment is processed, reduced, and redistributed, becoming part of a continuous flow that sustains the ecosystem. This role is essential in an environment where resources are limited and arrive infrequently. Without scavengers, organic material would remain inaccessible, locked within forms that could not be easily utilized. By breaking it down, they make it available to a wider range of organisms, extending the reach of each arrival and ensuring that its energy is fully distributed. Their activity also shapes the structure of the seafloor. As they move and feed, they disturb the sediment, mixing organic material into the layers below. This process influences the composition of the environment, affecting how nutrients are stored and released over time. The surface remains dynamic, even in its stillness, shaped by the quiet work of these organisms. Despite their importance, their presence is often subtle. Individually, they are small, their movements restrained, their forms blending into the surroundings. It is only when they gather that their impact becomes more visible, their collective activity transforming the material they encounter. Their existence reflects a balance between arrival and consumption, between what descends and what is returned to the system. They do not create new resources, but they ensure that none are lost. Each action contributes to a cycle that maintains continuity, allowing life to persist in a place where input is limited. As they continue their work, moving slowly across the seafloor or through the water just above it, they carry out a process that remains largely unseen yet fundamentally necessary. In their steady, quiet way, they sustain the deep, ensuring that every trace of life that arrives is transformed, shared, and carried forward into the ongoing rhythm of this hidden world. Size, in this depth, does not always follow expectation. Some of the largest forms present are not built from many cells working together, but from a single cell extended far beyond what is commonly imagined. These organisms do not divide themselves into specialized parts in the way more complex bodies do. Instead, they remain whole, expanding outward while maintaining a continuous internal structure. They are often overlooked at first glance, blending into the surrounding sediment or resting quietly upon it. Their shapes can resemble small mounds, delicate tubes, or irregular forms that seem more like part of the seafloor than living entities. Yet, within each of these forms, a single cell carries out all the functions necessary for life, coordinating processes that, elsewhere, would be distributed across many different tissues. Some of these organisms reach sizes visible to the unaided eye, extending several centimeters across. This scale, while modest compared to larger animals, is remarkable for a single cell. It requires an internal organization that can support transport, structural stability, and interaction with the environment over a relatively large area. Cytoplasm, the substance within the cell, flows slowly through internal channels, distributing nutrients and maintaining balance throughout the entire structure. Their interaction with the surrounding environment is closely tied to the sediment. Fine particles settle continuously, forming a soft layer across the seafloor. These single-celled organisms incorporate this material into their structure, binding grains together to create a form that holds its shape. The result is a composite body, part living tissue and part gathered sediment, shaped by both biological processes and the materials available. This construction serves multiple purposes. It provides a degree of stability, anchoring the organism within the soft substrate. It also increases surface area, allowing for more efficient interaction with the surrounding water. Nutrients can be absorbed across this extended boundary, supporting the slow processes that sustain the cell. Within these structures, complexity arises not from multiple parts, but from the organization of a single, continuous system. Different regions of the cell may specialize in particular functions, coordinating their activity through the movement of materials and signals within the cytoplasm. The boundaries between these regions are not fixed in the way they are in multicellular organisms, yet they remain distinct enough to support varied processes. This flexibility allows the organism to adapt its form over time. It can extend into new areas, incorporate additional sediment, or adjust its shape in response to changes in the environment. Growth is gradual, guided by the availability of resources and the steady accumulation of material. There is no rapid transformation, only a slow expansion that reflects the conditions around it. The presence of such organisms challenges familiar ideas about complexity. They do not rely on multiple layers of organization or specialized organs. Instead, they demonstrate that a single cell, given the right conditions, can achieve a level of structure and function that extends far beyond its usual scale. Their existence also reflects a balance between simplicity and capability. By remaining a single unit, they avoid the need for coordination between separate cells, reducing the complexity of communication. At the same time, they develop internal systems that allow them to manage their larger size effectively, maintaining function across their entire form. As they rest within the sediment, quietly shaping and reshaping their structure, they become part of the landscape itself. Their presence is subtle, yet it contributes to the overall fabric of the environment, linking biological activity with the physical composition of the seafloor. In this way, life reveals another variation of form, where size does not require multiplication, and complexity emerges from a single, continuous entity that expands, adapts, and endures within the quiet depths. There is an absence here that shapes every form more than any visible feature. It is not something added or built, but something entirely missing. No hollow chambers remain, no pockets of gas held within bodies, no internal spaces waiting to be filled with air. This absence is not accidental. It is a condition that defines what can exist. Gas behaves differently from liquid under pressure. As the surrounding force increases, gas compresses rapidly, its volume shrinking as the molecules are pushed closer together. A structure that depends on trapped gas cannot maintain its shape when this compression becomes extreme. The space collapses inward, distorting whatever contains it, often beyond the point of recovery. For organisms living at great depth, this creates a clear boundary. Any internal cavity filled with gas becomes a point of failure. The deeper the environment, the greater the compression, until the space can no longer exist in a stable form. Instead of resisting this force, life here has removed the problem entirely. Bodies are built without air. There are no lungs as they are known on land, no buoyant sacs filled with gas to regulate position. The internal structure is continuous, composed of fluids and tissues that respond differently to pressure. Liquids, unlike gases, do not compress significantly. Their volume remains nearly constant, allowing the body to retain its form even as the surrounding force increases. This absence is especially evident in the lack of swim bladders. In many fish closer to the surface, these gas-filled organs allow fine control over buoyancy. By adjusting the amount of gas within, the fish can rise or sink without expending much energy. At extreme depths, such a system would fail immediately. The gas would compress, eliminating its function and disrupting the balance of the organism. Instead, alternative methods take its place. Some species rely on the composition of their tissues to achieve neutral buoyancy. By adjusting the density of their bodies to closely match that of the surrounding water, they can remain suspended without the need for internal gas. This balance is achieved through a combination of water content, lipid composition, and structural arrangement. Lipids, which are less dense than water, can be distributed within the body to provide slight buoyancy. These fats are not stored in large, rigid compartments, but integrated into tissues in a way that contributes to overall balance. The effect is subtle, allowing the organism to maintain position with minimal effort. Other organisms use continuous, gentle movement to remain at a desired depth. Rather than relying on internal structures, they adjust their position through slow, controlled motions, countering any tendency to sink or rise. This approach aligns with the broader pattern of energy conservation, using only what is necessary to maintain stability. The absence of air also simplifies the internal environment. Without compressible spaces, There are fewer variables to manage as pressure increases. The body becomes a more uniform system, with fewer points where imbalance might occur. This uniformity contributes to the overall resilience of the organism, allowing it to function without disruption. In this way, what is missing becomes essential. The lack of gas-filled structures is not a limitation, but an adaptation that removes a fundamental vulnerability. By eliminating air, these organisms avoid the instability that would otherwise arise under constant pressure. As they move or remain still within their surroundings, their bodies hold their shape without strain, defined by a composition that aligns with the conditions around them. There are no hidden cavities waiting to collapse, no internal spaces that shift or distort. Everything remains in quiet balance. And within this balance, life continues without interruption, shaped not only by what it contains, but by what it has left behind, a form defined as much by absence as by presence. Across this immense distance, encounters are rare. The space between individuals stretches outward in every direction, leaving long intervals where no other presence passes close enough to be sensed. In such a setting, reproduction cannot depend on frequent contact or repeated opportunity. It must unfold within a system shaped by separation. Finding a mate becomes a matter of chance, guided by subtle signals. Chemical traces released into the water can travel outward, carried slowly through the surrounding medium. These signals do not move quickly, nor do they reach far in a direct line. Instead, they diffuse gradually, forming faint gradients that may, over time, intersect with another organism's path. Detection depends on sensitivity, on the ability to recognize these traces at extremely low concentrations. Movement in response to such signals remains measured. There is no rapid search, no wide-ranging pursuit. An organism may adjust its direction slightly, following a gradient that suggests proximity, yet the process remains uncertain. The vastness of the environment means that even with such guidance, encounters are infrequent. When they do occur, they carry a significance shaped by the long intervals between them. For many species, direct contact is not required. Reproduction often takes place through the release of gametes into the surrounding water. Eggs and sperm are dispersed, carried outward by gentle currents, their paths determined by movement that cannot be controlled. This method does not guarantee union, but it allows for the possibility of it across distances where physical meeting would be unlikely. The timing of this release becomes important. Some organisms synchronize their reproductive cycles, responding to subtle environmental cues that remain consistent even in the absence of light. These cues may include changes in temperature, chemical composition, or other factors that provide a shared signal. By releasing gametes at similar times, the likelihood of encounter increases, even within a dispersed population. Once released, these reproductive cells begin their own quiet journey. They drift, suspended in the water, subject to the same slow movements that shape all activity at this depth. Most will not meet their counterpart. They will disperse, degrade, or be consumed, becoming part of the surrounding system. Only a small fraction will come together, forming the beginning of a new organism. This low probability is balanced by the number of gametes produced. By releasing many, an organism increases the chance that at least a few will succeed. The strategy does not rely on certainty, but on numbers combined with time. Each release becomes an investment spread across the environment, with success measured not by frequency, but by persistence across generations. For those that do develop, the early stages of life unfold within the same conditions of scarcity and separation. Growth is gradual, shaped by the limited availability of resources and the need to conserve energy from the very beginning. Survival is not assured, and many will not reach maturity. The process remains selective, allowing only a few to continue. Some species adopt variations of this approach. In certain cases, individuals may retain fertilized eggs, providing a more controlled environment for development. Others may produce fewer offspring, investing more energy into each one. These differences reflect adjustments within the same overarching challenge, the need to reproduce within a space defined by distance. Throughout this system, reproduction becomes an extension of the environment itself. It is shaped by currents, by chemical signals, by the slow movement of water that connects individuals without bringing them together directly. The process unfolds quietly, without visible markers, yet it continues without interruption. And within this vast expanse, where encounters are rare and outcomes uncertain, life persists through this delicate balance, releasing its beginnings into the surrounding water and allowing time and chance to carry them forward. Nothing here seems to hurry, not because time has changed, but because so little demands urgency. The environment remains steady, its conditions shifting only in ways too gradual to be noticed within a single lifetime. In this quiet continuity, life unfolds at a pace that mirrors its surroundings, extending across years that pass without sudden interruption. Many organisms in this depth grow slowly, their development stretching across long spans. What might take months elsewhere can take years here, each stage unfolding with careful consistency. Cells divide at a measured rate, tissues expand gradually, and the overall form changes in increments so small they are nearly imperceptible from one moment to the next. This slow growth reflects the balance between energy and demand. Resources arrive irregularly, and each addition must be used efficiently. Rather than expanding quickly and risking instability, these organisms build themselves with restraint, adding only what can be supported over time. The result is a form that is stable, shaped by accumulation rather than rapid change. Lifespans extend accordingly. With fewer disturbances and a slower pace of internal processes, many organisms persist for long periods, continuing their existence across decades. There is little to force a sudden end. The environment does not impose rapid shifts, and predation, while present, follows patterns that do not disrupt the overall continuity. Survival becomes less about overcoming immediate threats and more about enduring steadily. This endurance is supported by the constancy of the surroundings. Temperature remains nearly unchanged, pressure is unvarying, and the absence of light removes the cycles that define other parts of the ocean. Without these fluctuations, there is no need for rapid adaptation. Life settles into a stable state, maintaining itself with minimal adjustment. Reproduction and growth align with this rhythm. Offspring develop slowly, following the same measured progression as their predecessors. There is no sudden surge of new life, no seasonal shift that alters the population dramatically. Instead, generations overlap, each one continuing alongside the next, creating a continuity that extends beyond individual lifespans. The absence of rapid change allows structures to remain consistent over time. Forms that prove effective do not need to be altered frequently. Evolution still occurs, but at a pace that reflects the stability of the environment. Changes accumulate gradually, shaped by subtle pressures rather than abrupt events. Movement through this timeline becomes less about progression and more about persistence. Each organism carries forward, maintaining its place within the system without the need for constant adjustment. The passage of time is marked not by visible transformation, but by the steady continuation of processes that remain largely unchanged. Even decay follows this slower rhythm. Organic material breaks down over extended periods, contributing to the overall balance without creating sudden shifts. The system absorbs and redistributes what is available, maintaining a continuity that extends across both living and non-living components. Within this framework, life does not rush toward completion. It extends itself across time, unfolding gradually, sustained by conditions that remain consistent. The absence of urgency allows for a different kind of existence, one defined by longevity and stability rather than rapid change. As these organisms continue through their extended lifespans, they become part of a system that persists with quiet reliability. Each individual contributes to a continuity that stretches beyond its own existence, linking past and present in a steady flow. And in this unchanging environment, where time moves without interruption or acceleration, life remains, not by adapting quickly, but by enduring slowly, carried forward through years that pass with a calm and constant rhythm. Sound arrives here before anything else, not as a sharp interruption, but as a distant presence that travels through the water with quiet persistence. It does not rely on light or visibility. It moves through the surrounding medium in slow, expanding waves, carrying traces of events that may have occurred far beyond immediate reach. Much of this sound originates not from living organisms, but from the earth itself. The seafloor shifts over long periods, its layers adjusting under forces that operate on a scale far larger than any individual life form. These movements can release low-frequency vibrations, spreading outward through both rock and water. The signals are often too subtle to be noticed at once, yet they continue to travel, maintaining their form across great distances. There are also moments when sediment shifts or settles, creating soft disturbances that ripple through the surrounding environment. These events are not dramatic, but they contribute to a continuous background of motion, a quiet record of the seafloor's gradual change. Even the slow movement of water along the contours of the trench can generate faint sounds, shaped by the interaction between current and terrain. Water, under these conditions, becomes an effective carrier of sound. Vibrations move through it more efficiently than through air, traveling farther and with less loss of energy. A disturbance that begins at one location can be detected at another long after its source has settled. The result is an environment where information spreads, not through sight, but through the movement of waves within the water. For the organisms that inhabit this depth, these vibrations form an additional layer of awareness. Specialized sensory structures respond to changes in pressure, detecting the passage of sound as variations in the surrounding medium. These receptors do not interpret sound in the way it is experienced elsewhere. Instead, they register patterns of movement, translating them into information about distance, direction, and activity. A distant shift in the seafloor may appear as a slow, low-frequency signal, distinct from the more immediate vibrations created by nearby movement. The passage of another organism produces a different pattern, one that changes more rapidly and carries a sense of proximity. By distinguishing between these signals, an organism can form an understanding of its surroundings without relying on vision. This form of detection integrates with other sensory inputs, creating a continuous awareness that extends beyond direct contact. Vibrations provide information that may not be available through chemical traces or physical interaction alone. They reveal events that occur outside immediate reach, allowing organisms to respond to changes that are not yet visible or tangible. The scale of this communication is shaped by the properties of the environment. Lower frequency sounds travel farther, maintaining their structure over long distances, while higher frequency signals dissipate more quickly. This creates a layered field of information, where some signals persist and others fade, each contributing to a broader pattern of perception. Within this system, sound does not dominate the environment, but it remains present as a subtle and continuous influence. It does not overwhelm or disrupt, but it carries traces of movement and change, linking distant events to local awareness. The deep becomes a place where vibrations travel quietly, connecting points that would otherwise remain isolated. As these waves move through the water, they pass through organisms that are attuned to their presence, each one interpreting the signals according to its own sensitivity. The result is a shared medium of information, one that exists without visibility, yet shapes behavior and response in ways that remain largely unseen. And in this steady transmission, the deep carries its own form of sound, not as noise, but as a quiet expression of movement and change, traveling through the water and becoming part of the way life perceives its hidden world. Far below the drifting water, the ground gathers itself into a surface that appears still, yet is never truly at rest. The seafloor here is not a solid plane in the usual sense, but a layered accumulation of fine material, each grain settling slowly over time. It forms a soft, yielding landscape, shaped by countless arrivals that have descended from far above. These sediments are composed of microscopic fragments, organic remains, and mineral particles carried through the water over long distances. As they settle, they create a continuous blanket that spreads across the trench floor. The layers build gradually, one upon another, recording a history that unfolds without interruption. Each addition is subtle, yet over time, the accumulation becomes significant, forming a depth of material that holds the imprint of distant processes. The surface itself is uneven, marked by gentle slopes and shallow depressions. It does not rise sharply or form dramatic features, but instead curves and dips in ways that reflect the slow movement of the earth beneath it. The trench is shaped by tectonic forces, where one section of the Earth's crust descends beneath another, creating a long, narrow depression that extends across the ocean floor. This movement is not visible in any immediate sense. It occurs over timescales far beyond direct observation, yet its effects are present in the structure of the landscape. The trench continues to deepen and shift, its form evolving gradually as the underlying plates adjust. The sediment above responds to this movement, settling into new contours, filling spaces as they form. Occasionally, the seafloor experiences more noticeable changes. A shift in the underlying structure can disturb the sediment, causing it to slide or resettle. These events are not frequent, but they contribute to the ongoing shaping of the environment. The surface is renewed in these moments, its arrangement altered slightly before returning to its steady accumulation. Pressure plays a defining role in this landscape. It compacts the layers of sediment, pressing them together over time. What begins as loose material gradually becomes more cohesive, forming a denser structure beneath the surface. This compaction influences how the sediment behaves, affecting its stability and the way it responds to movement. Water flows gently across this terrain, following the contours of the trench. These currents are slow, yet they contribute to the redistribution of material, shifting fine particles from one area to another. The result is a surface that is continuously adjusted, shaped by both downward accumulation and lateral movement. Despite these processes, the overall appearance remains calm. There are no sudden changes, no rapid transformations. The landscape evolves through a combination of gradual settling and occasional shifts, maintaining a steady presence that reflects the conditions of the deep. Life interacts with this environment in subtle ways. Organisms move across the surface, disturbing the sediment as they feed or travel. These disturbances are small, yet they contribute to the mixing of layers, influencing how material is distributed. The seafloor becomes a shared space, shaped by both geological forces and biological activity. The deeper layers hold a record of what has come before. As new material settles on top, older layers are preserved beneath, compressed and altered over time. This creates a vertical history where each level represents a different period, a different set of conditions that once existed above. In this way, the deep ocean floor becomes more than a surface. It is a structure formed through continuous accumulation and slow transformation, shaped by forces that operate both above and below. It reflects a balance between arrival and compression, between movement and stillness. And within this quiet landscape, where each grain finds its place over time, the trench holds its form, shaped by pressure, guided by motion, and defined by a passage of time that unfolds without urgency or interruption. Reaching this depth is not a matter of distance alone, but of enduring conditions that place continuous demands on everything that descends. The journey downward moves through layers that gradually increase in force, each meter adding pressure that must be contained, resisted, or matched. By the time the deepest regions are approached, the environment has become one that challenges even the most carefully designed systems. Exploration depends on equipment that can function without failure under these conditions. Materials must withstand immense compression without deforming, seals must remain intact to prevent intrusion, and internal systems must continue operating without interruption. Even small weaknesses can become critical at depth, where the surrounding force does not allow for gradual failure, but instead acts with constant and unyielding pressure. Submersibles, designed for these depths, are built with thick hulls, often spherical in shape, to distribute stress evenly. This form reduces the concentration of force at any single point, allowing the structure to endure the surrounding conditions. Inside, instruments are protected within carefully controlled environments, isolated from the pressure outside. Every component must be considered, from the smallest connection to the overall structure, ensuring that nothing is left vulnerable. Despite these precautions, limitations remain. The weight of reinforced materials restricts mobility, making movement slow and deliberate. Energy supply becomes a constraint, as power must be carried from the surface or generated within the vessel. Communication with the outside world is also limited, as signals weaken over distance and must pass through layers that disrupt their transmission. Robotic systems offer an alternative approach, reducing the risk to human presence. Remotely operated vehicles and autonomous instruments can descend to great depths, carrying cameras and sensors that record observations. These systems, however, face their own challenges. Control becomes less direct as distance increases, and delays in communication can affect precision. The environment itself can interfere with equipment, affecting visibility, movement, and data collection. The darkness presents an additional difficulty. Without natural light, observation relies entirely on artificial illumination. This light reveals only a limited area, leaving much of the surroundings unseen. Organisms and structures may remain outside this narrow field, undetected. The result is a view that is partial, offering glimpses rather than a complete picture. The seafloor adds further complexity. Its soft sediment can be disturbed by the presence of equipment, reducing visibility and altering the immediate environment. Movement must be carefully controlled to avoid disrupting the very conditions being studied. Even the act of observation can influence what is observed, requiring adjustments that balance access with preservation. Because of these challenges, successful missions to the deepest regions are relatively few. Each descent requires careful planning, significant resources, and a level of precision that leaves little room for error. The preparation alone can take years, with extensive testing to ensure that every component will function as intended. When missions do succeed, they provide valuable insight, yet they also highlight how much remains unknown. The limited number of visits means that observations are often brief, capturing only a small portion of the environment at a given time. The vastness of the area ensures that many regions remain unexplored, their conditions inferred rather than directly observed. In this way, exploration becomes an ongoing process, shaped by both technological capability and the constraints of the environment. Each attempt adds to a growing understanding, yet also reveals the limits of what can be achieved. As equipment continues to descend into these depths, it carries with it both the potential for discovery and the recognition of difficulty. The environment does not yield easily, requiring patience, precision, and a continuous refinement of methods. And within this balance, between what can be reached and what remains beyond, the deep ocean continues to hold its quiet distance, accessible only through efforts that must adapt to the conditions it defines. The boundary between depth and surface is not a gradual transition for the organisms that live below, but a limit that cannot be crossed without consequence. What exists in balance at one level becomes unstable when moved beyond it, even over short distances. The change does not wait. It begins the moment the surrounding pressure starts to fall. As an organism is brought upward, the conditions that define its internal state begin to shift. Pressure decreases with each meter, and the equilibrium that once existed between the body and its environment is disrupted. Fluids that remained stable under constant force now experience a different balance. Structures that depended on that force to maintain their form begin to respond in ways that are not sustainable. One of the most immediate effects appears within the chemistry of the organism. Molecules that were stabilized by high pressure no longer behave in the same way. Proteins, which rely on precise folding to function, begin to change their structure. The same configurations that allowed them to operate at depth can become unstable at lower pressure, altering their ability to carry out essential processes. This change is not gradual enough to allow adjustment. It occurs as the environment shifts, affecting function almost immediately. Cell membranes also respond to this transition. Their composition, tuned to remain flexible under compression, can become overly fluid when pressure decreases. This alters how substances move across the membrane, disrupting the careful regulation that maintains internal balance. The cell, which once operated in alignment with its surroundings, begins to lose that stability. In organisms that contain even small amounts of dissolved gases, another process unfolds. As pressure decreases, these gases expand, forming bubbles within tissues and fluids. This expansion can distort structures, interfere with circulation, and create damage that the organism cannot repair. What remained dissolved and stable at depth becomes disruptive as the environment changes. The overall structure of the body is also affected. Tissues that were supported by constant external pressure may not hold their form in the same way when that force is reduced. The balance between internal and external conditions shifts, leading to deformation or loss of integrity. The body is not built to resist this change, as it has never needed to. Attempts to bring deep-sea organisms to the surface often result in these combined effects. Even when the ascent is controlled and gradual, the difference in conditions is too great. The adaptations that allow survival at depth do not translate to environments with lower pressure. Instead, they become sources of instability, contributing to the breakdown of essential systems. This creates a limitation on direct observation. Many of the creatures that inhabit these depths cannot be studied outside their environment without altering or destroying the very characteristics that define them. As a result, understanding must often rely on observation within the conditions where they naturally exist. The fragility that appears in these moments is not a weakness within the organism itself, but a reflection of how closely it is aligned with its environment. Its structure, chemistry, and function are all shaped by the conditions of depth. When those conditions are removed, the alignment is lost, and the systems that depend on it begin to fail. This connection between organism and environment is complete. There is no separation between the two that allows for easy transition. The body is not designed to move between conditions, but to exist within a specific range where all its processes remain stable. As a result, these creatures remain bound to the depths they inhabit. Their survival depends on the constant presence of pressure, on the unchanging conditions that support their form and function. Beyond that boundary, the balance cannot be maintained, and so the deep holds them in place, not as a constraint, but as the only environment where their existence can continue without disruption, shaped entirely by the conditions that surround them. Change arrives here without urgency, unfolding across spans so long that no single life witnesses its full course. The conditions remain steady, yet within that steadiness, subtle pressures guide the direction of form and function. Evolution continues, not through rapid shifts, but through gradual refinement, shaped by the demands of an environment that rarely alters its character. The influence of pressure extends beyond immediate survival, reaching into the processes that determine which traits persist. Organisms that align more closely with the surrounding conditions continue, while those that do not gradually fade. This selection does not act quickly. It operates over extended periods, allowing small variations to accumulate, each one contributing to a form that fits more precisely within its environment. Because the conditions are so consistent, there is little need for broad adaptation. Instead, evolution favors specialization. Structures become finely tuned, chemistry adjusts at the smallest scales, and behaviors align closely with the patterns that define daily existence. The result is not diversity driven by change, but variation shaped by stability, where each organism reflects a narrow range of conditions with increasing precision. Isolation plays a central role in this process. The depth itself creates a boundary that separates these organisms from those in shallower waters. Movement between these regions is limited, and even when it occurs, the differences in conditions prevent most organisms from crossing successfully. As a result, populations remain largely confined to their specific depth, evolving independently from those above. This separation reduces the exchange of genetic material between environments. Without frequent interaction, evolutionary paths diverge, leading to forms that are distinct from their surface counterparts. Traits that might be unnecessary or disadvantageous in other regions become essential here, reinforced over generations through continued selection. The pace of these changes reflects the broader rhythm of the deep. With long lifespans and slow reproduction, each generation spans a significant period. Evolution progresses through these extended intervals, with each new generation carrying forward slight modifications that align more closely with the environment. There are no rapid turnovers, no sudden shifts that redefine the system. Instead, change accumulates quietly, almost imperceptibly. Environmental stability further shapes this progression. Without frequent disturbances, there are fewer external pressures to drive sudden adaptation. The conditions remain constant, allowing traits to persist without the need for continual adjustment. This creates a form of evolutionary continuity, where successful adaptations are maintained over long periods without significant alteration. Within this framework, even small changes can hold significance. A slight improvement in molecular stability, a minor adjustment in structure, or a subtle shift in behavior can influence survival over time. These changes do not transform the organism immediately, but they contribute to a gradual refinement that becomes evident across generations. The result is a collection of life forms that appear highly specialized, each one closely aligned with the conditions that define its existence. Their features are not the result of rapid innovation, but of steady adaptation shaped by an environment that favors precision over flexibility. This process also limits the range of possible forms. Because the conditions are so specific, there is little room for variation outside a narrow set of parameters. Evolution does not explore widely, but instead deepens its focus, refining what already works rather than expanding into new possibilities. As time continues to pass, these organisms carry forward their adaptations, each generation extending the line of continuity. The changes remain subtle, yet they accumulate, shaping life in ways that reflect the persistent influence of pressure, isolation, and stability. And within this quiet progression, evolution continues, not as a force of rapid transformation, but as a steady process of alignment, guiding life toward forms that fit ever more closely within the unchanging depths. Across these depths, a quiet conclusion begins to take shape, not announced directly, but formed through the accumulation of observation. Each organism, each adaptation, contributes to a broader understanding that extends beyond the trench itself. The patterns that emerge do not remain confined to this environment. They reach outward, reshaping how life is understood as a whole. What appears here suggests that the boundaries once assumed to define life are not fixed. Conditions that might seem restrictive or incompatible become, instead, part of a different framework where life continues to function. The absence of light, the presence of immense pressure, and the limited availability of resources do not prevent existence. They alter it, guiding it into forms that align with these conditions. This reveals that life does not depend on a single set of circumstances. It adapts to what is available, reorganizing its structure, chemistry, and behavior in response to its environment. The processes that sustain it remain consistent at their core, yet the way they are expressed can vary widely. The deep ocean becomes an example of this flexibility, demonstrating that life can persist far beyond familiar settings. Assumptions about survivability begin to shift in this context. Traits that might be considered essential in one environment are absent here, replaced by alternatives that fulfill the same functions in different ways. Gas-filled structures are replaced by fluid balance. Visual perception gives way to other forms of sensing, and rapid movement is exchanged for measured efficiency. Each change reflects a redefinition of what is necessary. This redefinition extends to the concept of limits. The idea that certain conditions mark the boundary of life becomes less certain when those conditions are shown to support complex systems. Pressure, once thought to impose an absolute constraint, becomes a factor that shapes adaptation rather than preventing it. The same applies to darkness and scarcity, which do not eliminate life, but guide its development. The organisms in this environment illustrate that life operates through principles that are adaptable rather than rigid. Stability, efficiency, and balance remain central, yet the forms they take depend on the surrounding conditions. This adaptability allows life to occupy spaces that might otherwise appear uninhabitable. These observations also influence how other environments are considered. If life can exist under such specific and extreme conditions, then the range of possible habitats expands. Environments previously dismissed may hold potential, provided that the necessary adaptations can arise. The deep ocean becomes a reference point, offering insight into how life might function elsewhere. At the same time, the continuity observed here emphasizes that adaptation does not require constant change. Stability can support life just as effectively as variation, provided that the conditions remain consistent. Evolution continues, but it does so in alignment with the environment, refining rather than transforming. The presence of life in these depths also highlights the interconnected nature of biological systems. Even in isolation, organisms rely on processes that link them to broader cycles, whether through the movement of material, the exchange of energy, or the gradual flow of time. The system remains complete, sustained by interactions that extend beyond immediate visibility. As these patterns become clearer, they contribute to a broader understanding of life as a phenomenon that extends across a wide range of conditions. The limits that once seemed well-defined begin to dissolve, replaced by a more flexible framework that accounts for variation and adaptation. And within this expanded view, the deep ocean stands as a quiet example, not of exception, but of possibility, showing that life can exist wherever the conditions allow it to align with its surroundings, even in places that once seemed beyond its reach. Far from the ocean floor, beyond the reach of this planet's atmosphere, there are places where conditions echo what exists in these depths. They are not connected by water or proximity, yet they share a common structure, environments shaped by pressure, darkness, and isolation. The resemblance is not exact, but it is close enough to suggest a pattern that extends beyond a single world. Some of these places lie beneath layers of ice, where vast bodies of liquid are held in darkness, sealed away from any direct contact with light. These hidden oceans are not visible from the surface, yet their presence is inferred through subtle observations, through the way surfaces shift and respond to forces beneath them. Within these concealed spaces, conditions may remain stable over long periods, much like those found in the deepest regions of Earth's oceans. In such environments, the absence of sunlight does not necessarily prevent the possibility of life. The processes observed in deep ocean ecosystems demonstrate that energy can be obtained through alternative means, that biological systems can function without reliance on light-driven production. Chemical gradients, interactions between materials, and the slow movement of energy through a system can provide the basis for sustained activity. Pressure, which once seemed to limit the reach of life, becomes a factor that shapes its form rather than restricting its presence. In subsurface oceans beyond Earth, pressure would also be immense, created by the weight of overlying ice and water. The adaptations seen in deep ocean organisms suggest that such conditions can be accommodated, provided that internal systems align with the surrounding environment. Isolation, too, plays a role in both settings. Just as the deepest parts of the ocean are separated from surface ecosystems, these distant oceans would exist without direct exchange with their surroundings. Life, if present, would evolve within that isolation, shaped by conditions that remain consistent over long periods. The result could be systems that are stable, self-contained, and adapted to a narrow range of environmental factors. The deep ocean serves as a reference for understanding how such systems might function. It offers a tangible example of life operating under constraints that were once considered prohibitive. By studying these conditions, patterns emerge that can be applied more broadly, providing insight into how life might persist elsewhere. Exploration of these distant environments remains limited, constrained by distance and technological capability. Direct observation is not yet possible in the same way it is within Earth's oceans. As a result, understanding must be built from indirect evidence, supported by comparisons to environments that can be studied more closely. The parallels between these settings do not confirm the presence of life beyond Earth, but they expand the range of conditions under which it might exist. They suggest that life is not confined to familiar environments, but may arise wherever the necessary balance of factors is present. This possibility extends the scope of exploration, guiding attention toward places that might otherwise be overlooked. In this context, the deep ocean becomes more than a location. It becomes a model, a way of understanding how life adapts to conditions that differ from those at the surface. The principles observed here, stability, efficiency, and alignment with the environment, can be applied to other settings, offering a framework for interpreting what might be found. As these connections are considered, the boundary between Earth and the wider universe becomes less distinct. The same processes that sustain life in one place may operate in another, shaped by different conditions, but guided by similar principles. And within this quiet correspondence, the depths of the ocean extend their relevance outward, suggesting that the patterns observed here may not be unique, but part of a broader expression of life, unfolding wherever conditions allow it to take form. Beyond the paths that have been traced and the places briefly illuminated, there remains a vast expanse that has never been directly observed. It extends outward in every direction, uninterrupted, holding regions that no instrument has reached and no image has captured. What is known forms only a thin layer of understanding across a depth that continues far beyond it. The scale of what remains unexplored is not defined by distance alone, but by the difficulty of access. Each descent requires precision and endurance, limiting how often and how widely exploration can occur. As a result, large portions of the deep ocean remain untouched, their conditions inferred rather than seen. The map is incomplete, marked by scattered points of observation separated by wide, unvisited spaces. Within these unobserved regions, the same processes continue. Sediment settles, currents move slowly across the terrain, and life persists in forms shaped by the surrounding conditions. Yet the details of these systems remain largely unknown. Each unexplored area holds the possibility of variations, of organisms and interactions that have not yet been recorded. When exploration does reach new locations, the results often extend beyond what was anticipated. Familiar patterns may appear, confirming what is already understood, but alongside them, unexpected forms emerge. These discoveries do not disrupt the overall continuity of the environment, yet they add to its complexity, revealing details that were previously hidden. The process of discovery unfolds gradually. Each mission contributes a small addition to a broader understanding, filling in portions of the unknown while leaving much still beyond reach. The pace reflects the constraints of the environment, requiring patience and sustained effort over time. There is no single moment that reveals the entirety of the deep, only a continuous progression of insight. This ongoing exploration shapes the way the ocean is perceived. Rather than a fully known space, it becomes a frontier defined by its remaining unknowns. The term does not suggest emptiness, but potential, a recognition that much of what exists has yet to be encountered directly. The deep ocean stands as one of the few places on Earth where this level of uncertainty remains. Technological development gradually expands the reach of exploration. New instruments, improved materials, and refined methods allow for deeper and more sustained observation. These advances increase the frequency and scope of missions, yet they do not eliminate the challenges entirely. The environment continues to impose limits, ensuring that exploration remains a careful and deliberate process. As understanding grows, it also raises new areas of inquiry. Each discovery suggests further possibilities, extending the range of what might be found. The unknown does not diminish with exploration, but shifts, revealing new questions as previous ones are addressed. The boundary between the known and the unknown remains present, moving gradually as knowledge expands. The organisms that inhabit these depths continue their existence regardless of observation. Their presence is not dependent on being seen, and their processes unfold whether or not they are recorded. Exploration does not create these systems, it reveals them, bringing into view what has always been there. In this way, the deep ocean maintains a quiet independence. It holds its own continuity, shaped by conditions that do not change in response to human presence. The unknown remains, not as a gap to be filled quickly, but as a space that invites careful approach. And within this vast, unobserved expanse, the deep continues to extend beyond what is currently understood, offering a frontier that is not defined by distance alone, but by the depth of what remains to be discovered, waiting in stillness beneath the surface. There is no single moment that defines survival here, no sudden movement or visible struggle that marks the continuation of life. Instead, it unfolds as a steady presence, carried forward through conditions that remain constant and undisturbed. The persistence is quiet, expressed not through action, but through endurance. Without light to guide cycles or signal change, life does not organize itself around day or night. There is no visible rhythm imposed from above, no external marker that divides time into distinct phases. Activity continues in a way that is continuous rather than segmented, shaped by internal processes that remain aligned with the surrounding environment. Speed holds little value in this setting. Movement, when it occurs, is measured and deliberate, conserving energy rather than expending it rapidly. The absence of urgency reflects the limited availability of resources, where every action must be balanced against what can be sustained. Organisms do not chase abundance, but instead exist within scarcity, adjusting their behavior to match what is present. This adjustment leads to a form of simplicity that is not a reduction, but a refinement. Structures are streamlined, processes are efficient, and functions are focused on what is necessary for continuation. There is little excess, no unused capacity that would require additional energy to maintain. Each component contributes directly to survival, forming a system that operates with precision. Energy flows through this environment in small amounts, arriving gradually and being used with care. Organisms absorb what becomes available, integrating it into their systems without waste. Growth is slow, reproduction is infrequent, and maintenance becomes the primary focus. The balance between intake and expenditure remains steady, allowing life to persist without interruption. Interactions between organisms follow this same pattern. There is no constant competition, no rapid exchanges that define relationships. Instead, interactions occur as part of a broader system, where each organism occupies a role, that contributes to the overall continuity. Predation, scavenging, and other processes exist, but they unfold without disrupting the stability of the environment. The absence of sound and light as dominant forces creates a setting where activity is often unnoticed. Movements pass without drawing attention, and changes occur without immediate visibility. Life continues within this quiet framework, sustained by processes that do not rely on external signals. Adaptation within this environment reflects a commitment to efficiency. Traits that reduce energy use, maintain stability, and support long-term survival are favored. Over time, these traits become more pronounced, shaping organisms that are closely aligned with the conditions they inhabit. The result is a form of life that persists through consistency rather than change. This persistence extends across generations. Each organism contributes to a continuity that is not defined by rapid turnover, but by the steady passage of time. Offspring inherit systems that are already suited to their environment, allowing them to continue without the need for significant adjustment. The process remains stable, carried forward through repetition rather than transformation. Even in the absence of abundance, life does not diminish. It adjusts, finding ways to sustain itself within the limits that exist. The environment does not provide excess, but it offers enough for those that are adapted to use it efficiently. Survival becomes a matter of balance, maintained through careful alignment with available resources. As this pattern continues, the deep ocean becomes a place where life endures without drawing attention to itself. It does not expand rapidly or change dramatically. It remains, sustained by simplicity, shaped by restraint, and carried forward through processes that unfold without interruption. And within this quiet persistence, life continues, not through force or speed, but through a steady alignment with the conditions that surround it, existing in silence, yet never absent. At the farthest reach of descent, where distance from the surface becomes almost abstract, a quiet realization settles in. It does not arrive suddenly, but forms gradually, shaped by everything that has been observed along the way. The deeper the journey has moved, the more the idea of limitation has shifted, softened, and expanded into something less certain than it once seemed. What rests below does not announce itself. It remains concealed beneath layers of water that stretch far beyond immediate perception, holding a world that continues without interruption. The conditions are unlike those at the surface, yet they do not exclude life. Instead, they define it, shaping forms that align with pressure, darkness, and stillness in ways that remain precise and consistent. The trench stands as a reminder that absence of light, of speed, of abundance, does not equate to emptiness. Life persists within these absences, not by overcoming them, but by existing in harmony with them. Each organism encountered along this descent reflects that balance, carrying within it a structure that matches the environment it inhabits. This challenges the way limits are understood. Boundaries that once appeared fixed begin to dissolve when examined through the presence of life in such conditions. The idea that certain environments are uninhabitable gives way to a broader perspective, one where life adapts to a wider range of circumstances than previously imagined. Yet even with this expanded understanding, much remains beyond reach. The explored regions represent only a small portion of what lies below. Vast areas continue without direct observation, their details unknown, their forms unrecorded. The deep holds more than what has been seen, extending into spaces that remain quiet and undisturbed. This unseen expanse is not empty. It carries its own continuity, its own systems and processes that unfold without recognition. The absence of observation does not diminish their presence. It simply leaves them in a state of quiet existence, continuing as they always have. As the descent comes to rest, the surface feels distant, not only in space, but in perspective. What once defined the boundaries of life now appears as a limited view, shaped by familiarity rather than completeness. The deeper understanding that emerges is not one of certainty, but of openness, a recognition that there is more to discover than what is currently known. The ocean, in its deepest form, becomes a place of reflection. It suggests that the unseen parts of the planet hold their own significance, that they contribute to a larger picture that is still forming. The visible world is only one part of that picture, connected to layers that remain hidden beneath it. There is a quiet invitation in this realization, not expressed through urgency, but through presence. It rests in the idea that exploration is ongoing, that understanding continues to grow with each observation. The deep does not demand attention, yet it offers a perspective that extends beyond immediate experience. As this journey concludes, the sense of distance softens, replaced by an awareness of connection. The surface and the depths are part of the same system, linked through processes that move gradually between them. What lies below is not separate, but integrated, contributing to the continuity of the planet as a whole. And within this quiet world, hidden beneath miles of water, life continues, shaped by conditions that once seemed impossible, yet now stand as part of a broader understanding, reminding us that the unseen still holds meaning, waiting patiently within the depths.